tonight, and I'm particularly interested in this one. I'm interested in all of them, but I'm really interested in this one, Paul, in particular because this is actually a very student-centered talk we're going to get tonight. This is about how we actually involve students in generating questions. So Paul will be talking to us about PeerWise. Some of you may have already know about PeerWise, but we're going to hear all about it tonight from Paul. So Paul, I'm going to hand over to you now, and you can start the presentation. So thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Jeff, for the introduction. I'm just going to switch on my video here. I was talking to Matthew about this a little bit earlier, and I will switch, hello there. So I will switch this video off again after a short period of time so that it doesn't sort of consume too much of the bandwidth, but I thought it might be nice to kind of say a virtual hello to people out there. So I'm just going to advance the slide. The slides for me are kind of over here, so I hope it's not too disconcerting for me to be looking kind of at the camera and over at the slides. So what I'll be talking about is a tool called PeerWise, and hopefully this evening we have an opportunity to kind of all participate to get an idea for how you can get your students to use a tool like this to actually crowdsource exam questions and get students to create exam questions. So kind of like the overview for this session is broken up into these 4 sections. Apologies also that it's so dark here in the room. It's 7 p.m. at night in Auckland at the moment, and I know for some of you it's very early in the morning, so I really appreciate you actually coming along and listening to this session. So you can see section 2 on this overview is the participate section. And I'm really excited about trying to do this with so many people in different parts of the world. Hopefully it's going to work smoothly, and we should be getting to that part of the session in about 15 or 20 minutes, about 15 minutes from now, so perhaps at about 20 past or so. I'd also like to spend just a little bit of time in section 3 there talking about some of the experiences we've had at the University of Auckland, and of course that's used PeerWise recently. And just at the end then of the session, perhaps some of you might be interested in trying to use PeerWise yourself, and if that's the case, then I'd just like to talk about some of the ideas, some of the things that we've experimented with, and not everything, of course, works well. And one thing I'd really love to hear about is if anyone out there has experiences using PeerWise. I think that would be a really great opportunity to share some of those, and kind of I'd like to hear about things. I'd like to hear about where it's worked well and where it hasn't worked well as well. So what I'd like to do to begin with, though, is talk a little bit about what PeerWise is, cover some of my motivations for kind of getting started with this work, and just give you an overview of the tool and how it's been used and really what it's designed for. Before I start with that, and this will be a great opportunity to see who's actually listening and whether the chat window works. What you see on the slide at the moment is a token for a particular game, and I'd really like to see if anyone can identify or recognize where this token has come from, and if they can, type it into the chat window. So Chad looked to be the quickest person there. Fantastic. Oh, well done, guys. Excellent. Oh, wow, that's really cool, isn't it? To see a lot of responses there. So, indeed, Trivial Pursuit is the game. And the reason I've shown this token here is that when we get to section 2 of the webinar, that's the kind of participate section, what I'd like to do is ask everybody to contribute a question that's kind of a general knowledge type question, maybe the kind of question you might find in a game of Trivial Pursuit. And the reason for that is that we all have different discipline backgrounds and different areas of expertise, and I think it's going to really work best if we contribute sort of general knowledge type questions rather than something that's very specific to our disciplines. Okay, so what I might do is just switch off the video now and just start with the actual presentation. So it was very nice to meet virtually everybody, and we'll get underway now. Okay, so in this section I'd just like to give you a little overview of PeerWise, talk a little bit about the philosophy of the tool, and really what it was designed for. So one of, I guess, the motivations for me teaching at the University of Auckland is the fact that we have very large classes at our first year level. So the photo that you see there in the top left is actually half of one of the classes that I taught last year. So, a very large group of students, and it's very obvious that there's only so much time that individual staff members have to help students in a class. And I'm sure many of you have experienced that as well if you teach these large classes. And so the idea of sort of exploring ways of getting students to support one another's learning is very attractive. And I know that a lot of people have done work in this area, looking at sort of collaborative learning. And what I was really interested in was a very specific type of activity where students would work together to create a learning resource. So the idea is that students would actually contribute content to a resource, and that resource would then become a useful learning repository for other students in the course. And one of the I guess observations that sort of inspired this approach was the fact that students today have really embraced this phenomenon of Web 2.0, and you can see in the bottom right of the slide just some of the very many popular Web 2.0 platforms that students use on a daily basis. And so students are really familiar with this idea of if you have lots of individuals making contributions to some resource, that resource can actually become really valuable. And so that was really one of the sort of inspirations behind getting started with PeerWise. So PeerWise is a web-based repository, and the repository holds multiple choice questions. So standard MCQs where there is a question stem and then a set of alternative answers. And the students are the ones who are responsible for creating that content. So it's not the instructor who's created the multiple choice questions and are using them to assess their students. It's students who are actually creating the questions and sharing those questions with their classmates. So I'd like to, I guess, talk a little bit about why getting students to create multiple choice questions can actually be a valuable learning activity. And I think to do this, I'd like to look at an actual question that was developed by a student at the University of Otago. So I see Matthew's asked a question, are there any plans to add other question types, numerical, true, false, fill in the blanks, matching? We are exploring other types of questions with different tools. So PeerWise is specifically related to multiple choice questions. That's the style of question that it supports. So there are two other tools that we're currently looking at the moment, and we've been developing over the last period of time. One of those is called CodeWrite, and that is a tool where students create programming exercises. So this tool is specifically designed for students learning how to program, and they create programming exercises and then share those with their classmates. And so their classmates can then practice answering these programming exercises. So answering a programming exercise requires actually typing code as opposed to selecting from one of 4 options as you might do with a multiple choice question. There's also a tool called StudySieve, which we've been looking at, where students create open response questions. So instead of multiple choice questions, it's just the question stem and then an empty box into which students can type their answer. And I think, sorry, StudySieve, let me just write that. And I think what we are finding is that these different style of questions all have kind of advantages and disadvantages. So, one of the nice things about multiple choice questions is that it can actually be very challenging for students to create the alternatives. They need to think about what misconceptions their classmates might have. Whereas authoring, say, an open response question isn't as demanding, but then answering an open response question requires different skills often than answering multiple choice questions. So there is a real set of kind of pros and cons for these things, and we're really just in the early stages of evaluating those other tools, whereas PeerWise has been around for a little bit longer, and so we have a lot more experience with this tool. So, as I said, let me just look at an example of a question that was developed by a student at Otago. So this is a question. Now, I don't have a background in biology, but this was a student who was studying a biology course, and in order to create a multiple choice question, the very first step a student has to undertake is to kind of reflect on what they've been learning in class. So they need to think about what the important concepts and ideas are that they've been studying. So this particular student obviously identified diabetic ketoacidosis as an important concept or idea, or in this case condition that they need to know about. And so they have formulated their question around that idea. And so in this particular case, they've asked what the body's responses, how the body responds to this particular condition. So the next step in the question authoring process is coming up with the alternative answers. And perhaps for those of you who do have a biology background, you might be interested in actually trying to answer this question, but these are the alternative answers that the student had to develop on their own. So as I mentioned before, the idea here is that to come up with a good set of alternatives, and I'm sure many of you, if you've developed multiple choice questions yourself, know how difficult that can be. Ideally, the student thinks about what type of misconceptions their classmates might have. So in this case, they've talked about the way the kidneys compensate by either excreting H+, or the lungs compensate by inhaling CO2. So they've needed to think about sort of plausible alternatives to this answer. And of course, one of the answers needs to be the correct answer. So the student who authors the question also indicates which answer is the correct one. And the final step in the question authoring process is providing an explanation for the answer to the question. So again, this gets students to, in their own words, explain sort of how they understand the topic. So the explanation that you see up here is the one that was provided to this question by this particular student. And along the way, we've surveyed students in different classes, and it turns out that this question authoring process is something that many students seem to value. So the types of comments that we've got back, and I've just selected two responses from surveys that we've run in the past, kind of about the question authoring process, are the ones that I've shown here. So you don't really understand how much or how little you know about a concept until you try to devise a good original question about it. The aspect I found truly useful was the creation of questions, which reinforced my understanding while also actively making me clarify and solidify my thought process. So very shortly we will get a chance to kind of play around a little bit with the PeerWise tool. And before we do that, I'd just like to show you a little bit about how the interface looks to the user. And in doing this, I'd like to talk about what process a student goes through if they want to use this resource to actually practice answering questions. So now assume that all of the students in the class have had an opportunity to author questions, and now students are going to practice answering those questions. So Joanne has asked a question about, do you have a process for teaching students how to develop and evaluate questions and answers? And this is a really excellent question, and I think it's something that isn't particularly well developed. One of the things I'm going to talk about at the end in terms of kind of things to think about includes providing sort of exemplars for different disciplines, because I think different subject areas or good questions for different subject areas often have different characteristics. And so at the moment, the way I do this with my students is to simply show some examples. But I know that there is some work, particularly a group at the University of British Columbia, who've done a lot of work in actually running tutorials for students to teach them about how to create good questions for their particular discipline, which I believe was biology in that case. And Amanda Sykes. Oh, hello, Amanda. I didn't know you were there. So Amanda is a good friend of mine, a colleague from Glasgow, and she's also prepared an introduction for the first year veterinary science students. So perhaps certainly I can, or Amanda, if you have a link to that, I think you can just paste it into the chat room there. Okay, so let me just quickly look at the interface. So you'll get a chance to play around with this in a second. So you can see that the main interface is broken up into these three sections. There is the Your Questions section, where all of the questions that you create are organized. The second section is the Answered Questions section, so that once you've answered a question, it moves into that section, and that way you can go back and review questions that you've answered previously. And the section at the bottom there is the Unanswered Questions section. So that's where all of the questions that your classmates have created appear. So if we select the Unanswered Questions section, then what we have access to are all of the questions that our classmates have created. And they're all available in the section, and there are different ways that we can filter those questions. So let's say, for example, that we want to look at the best questions. And by best, what I mean is when students answer questions, they can rate the quality of the questions. And those quality ratings then get aggregated for each question. And so we can use those quality ratings to filter the large number of questions and therefore focus just on the highest rated questions. So if you look at kind of the rightmost column in this screenshot, you can see that these questions are sorted in decreasing order of quality rating. And you can also see the title there, Unanswered Questions on Lecture 20. When students author their questions, they can tag them with topics that are relevant. And so, for example, one of the topics that students used in this course was Lecture 20. And so what we're looking at actually in this table are all of the questions that are about the topic of Lecture 20, so presumably whatever material was covered in that lecture, sorted in decreasing order of quality. So let's say we select one of these questions in the table. It's presented to us like this. So you can see the question, you can see the alternatives, and we then have an opportunity to answer the question by selecting one of the alternatives. So if we select an alternative, then we get feedback about the answer that we've selected. One thing to keep in mind here is that because these are student-authored questions, it's not guaranteed that the answer the student indicated was correct is actually the correct answer. And so the feedback that's shown to students makes it very clear whether their answer agrees with the answer the author suggested, or whether their answer agrees with the answer that most students in the class have selected at that time. So it's really important, and I think students do understand this because they're familiar with using systems like Wikipedia, say, where all of the content is created by the community. And while there are no guarantees that that content is going to be 100% correct, it's still a useful resource. As long as when you're using a resource like that, you keep this in mind. So if students question the answer that the author has suggested is correct, they can then go ahead and provide some comments about that and perhaps provide some feedback to the author. So the next step then is looking at how all other students in the class have answered the question. So what you can see here is I've selected C as my answer, and the sort of histogram you see on the right-hand side of that table with those small red bars, that indicates how many students have selected the different answers. So in this case, the answer I selected, C, was also the most commonly selected answer by other students in the class. But for example, if I had selected B as my answer, I would have got this feedback that only 3% of the class has actually selected that answer. And so it's a very strong indication that not only is my answer probably wrong, but I also probably have a misunderstanding that is not shared by very many other people in the class. And so this type of feedback is at a very fine-grained level. So it's not sort of, the typical type of feedback a student might get in a course is, maybe the average mark that all students have achieved in a midterm test or something, and they can compare their overall performance against that overall performance. But here students can get a sense of whether they understand things on a topic basis compared with their classmates. And again, the type of feedback we've got from students is quite positive about that aspect, the aspect of being able to compare themselves against their classmates. So here again are a couple of examples of comments that students have written about this. So the biggest benefit for me was getting an understanding of the kind of level of questions and knowledge that is possessed by other students. Being able to see how other people answered was great, as it allowed me to recognize at which level I was at compared to everyone else. And the final step then is the step of evaluating the question that a student has answered. So a student can evaluate the difficulty and the quality of the question, and those ratings that they assign to the question are then again used by other students when they're filtering the questions. And students can also write comments about the question. So very shortly when we start this participation part of the webinar this evening, it'd be really great if we all sort of post questions about one another's questions. Post comments about one another's questions. And just finally, a number of very basic game mechanics have also been built into PeerWise. And the idea here is to kind of, they're purely for fun, but the idea is to motivate students that like things such as, earning points for their contributions, or earning virtual achievements, which are also sometimes called badges. So for example, there are badges like the Genius badge or the Einstein badge that students earn for answering a certain number of questions correctly and that kind of thing. Okay, so that gives you a little bit of an overview of the PeerWise tool. This is the part that I've been most excited about, and that is everyone actually trying to use it. And it's kind of intimidating enough when everyone's actually in the same room using a tool like this, where you can actually help people out. But here it's going to be very interesting because, of course, we're all in different locations. So we'll do our best to make this work. So Deb asks, can you do maths equations? So yeah, you can, Deb. There are, what you'll see in a moment when you author your question is there is a LaTeX equation editor. So if your students are familiar with LaTeX, they can build equations that way, and there are also a couple of graphical math editors that can be used to build relatively simple equations. Okay, so this is section 2. Is it possible if in the chat window people just quickly say ready or something to indicate that they are kind of ready to participate? Oh, wonderful. Okay, that's great. Okay, fantastic, guys. Well, let's give this a go. We'll do our very best to make it work. So as you can see on this slide, I think the first thing to do will be to open a new browser window. Of course, you can open a tab if you prefer, but just open a window in your browser just so that you are ready for this part of the webinar. And once you've opened your browser window, the idea will be to go to the PeerWise website. So PeerWise is a web-based tool, so any student can access this from their browser. Now there are 2 ways that you can go to PeerWise, and I've mentioned them both on this slide. Yep, certainly. Great, so Matthew has just put the link into the chat window, Deb, so you can see the link there. So you can either click on the link that Matthew has put into the window, or you can Google PeerWise, and then for this particular workshop, this particular webinar, I've created this Transforming Assessment workshop institution. So if you just start typing a few characters like T-R-A-N-S, you should see that appear, and then just click on Go. Now what I'm going to do is make sure that everybody who wants to be involved in this is able to. So what you should see in front of you is the screen that I've got now appearing on the slides. Now I know that some people like to move ahead and you're welcome to do that, but just be aware that it's difficult for me to kind of see what's on your screen. In fact, I can't see that. So what I would encourage you to do is to kind of move step by step through this process with me. But by all means, if you want to try and go ahead, you can. So what I'd like to ask now is there anybody who would like to participate that has not been able to get to the Transforming Assessment Workshop login page that you see on the slides in front of you? If anyone is not able to get to that page, could you please just indicate that in the chat room?
You can use the ticks and crosses if you want. This is Jeff just saying if you can't get on, you can put a cross and then we can see that beside your name if there's a problem.
Okay, great. Yep. Well, it looks like some people are putting ticks as well.
Yep.
Oh, great. Oh, that's very useful to give us an idea of that. But also, it looks like no one in the chat room has mentioned that they are unable to get there, so that's really great. Okay, so let's all then move on to the next step. Now, do I have a pen here? Now, you'll see that just underneath the login boxes is this registration link. Oh, good question. So, Rhett, so it looks like, some of you may have used PeerWise before, in which case I'll be really interested to kind of hear a little bit about your feedback towards the end of the workshop. If you have used PeerWise before, then no, you can't use your current logins for this particular activity. So I've set up this resource just for this workshop tonight. And so you will need to create an account just for this workshop. And so that's the process that we're going to step through now. So yeah, thank you very much, Rhett, for asking that question. So if you click on the registration link, what you should see in front of you is the window that I've got here. So this, you should essentially see this big blue pencil. If you are ready, then please click on the Begin Registration link that you see at the bottom of that page. And what we're going to go through here is the standard registration process that students go through when they join PeerWise for the very first time. So a student only goes through this registration process once. Once they have their PeerWise account, they can then join additional courses with that one account. So this is kind of a one-time registration process. Okay, so in the username box down here, what I think would be really neat is to kind of get a sense for where everybody is from. If you don't mind using, for example, your first name followed by an underscore, followed by the main city that you are currently in at the moment, I think that would be really neat. So what I should have done is used Paul _ Auckland. You don't have to do that, but I think that might be quite neat to kind of see where everyone is from. It's worth knowing they can use the same account for 3 years too. Indeed, yep. So Amanda has been a regular user of PeerWise for a while now. Okay, so once you've entered your username, hopefully your first name followed by, that's fine, Joanne, you can go back if you want, go back to step 1 and start all over again, or you can just continue using the Joe Calder, that's fine. So once you've entered your name, step 2 of the registration process is where you enter a password. Make up anything that you like for this, but probably choose something really easy. At the conclusion of this webinar, I will delete all of this content, so it's not important that you choose anything that's particularly secure, so just any simple password is going to be fine. Once you've done that and you click Save Password, you'll then move on to step 3, which asks you to enter the course ID. Now for course ID, please enter 6453. So there are a large number of courses on PeerWise, and the one that I've created for this particular webinar is 6453. So please enter that into the course ID box, so you enter that down here. And the final step of the registration process is where you enter your identifier. Now, what you would typically do is have students enter some identifier that allows you to know who they are. So what's very commonly used is either a student ID number or an email address, but you can use anything you like. But for this particular webinar, please choose a number between 1 and 500. There is, of course, a possibility that you're going to collide and choose someone else's number, but I don't think that's very likely. So please choose a number between 1 and 500, something that you don't think someone else is likely to choose, and enter that as your identifier. And if you see this green tick that says confirm, then everything has gone well. The only possible problem at this stage is that maybe you've chosen the same username as someone else, but again, I think that's very unlikely if you've used your first name and your city. So if you click on the Create My PeerWise Account button, then what you should see is this login page. Just go ahead and log in using the username and the password that you just used to create that account. If you have any problems with this, then please let me know. Wow, so Alison says my number has already been chosen. So it has to be between 1 and 500, Alison. It is possible, okay, well, it's possible that someone did grab that. So just go back and choose a different number between 1 and 500. I was hoping that would be a large enough range of numbers. Sure, so let me just go back, Scott, and show you the course ID. So the course ID is 6453. Yeah, try and choose something that you think is unlikely. So don't choose maybe 100. I was trying to think of a better way of doing this, but I think this is probably going to work. Now, once you have, I'll leave this slide up for now. Once you have gone into the course, you should find that there is one question there that is available for you. That was a question that I prepared earlier. So please go ahead and just answer that question and provide some feedback. If you want to write a comment or if you want to rate that question, that will be just fine. I'm actually going to log in now myself so that I can have a look at how everything is going. No, good question. You definitely do not need to add an email address, Ian. You can if you want, but as I say, at the end of this webinar, I'll be deleting all of this content, so don't worry about that for now. Okay, Scott, I've just also got your message in the chat window, so I can probably help you out. Okay, so yeah, let me, where would be a good place to do this? So, just for those that have joined late, what you want to do is go to the URL that Matthew had pasted into the chat window, and Matthew's just pasted that in again. Once you have done that, then you want to follow through the registration process. And the only bit of information you need, which I'll put into the window at the moment, is that the course ID is 6453. So if you follow the link that Matthew has put into the chat window and you enter the course ID of 6453, all of the other instructions should be fairly straightforward to follow. For those of you that have, let me just check to see how many people have answered that question. So we've actually had 19 people answer the question so far, so that's really good. That means most of you have been able to do that. For those of you that are just getting through the registration step, you should find that once you log in, there is this TA workshop link, and that's the one that you can click on, and that's where you will see the interface that we looked at a bit earlier in the webinar. So that's where you can click on your on the unanswered questions and go ahead and answer the question that I've provided. What I'm going to do is just have a look at how many people have managed to register. So let me go and do that now. Oh, wow, well done. Okay, we've actually got a lot of people registered now. Let me just see how many we've got. I'll just do a quick count. Wow, we've actually had 41 people. So I think that's pretty much everybody. Well, that's excellent. Well done, everyone. I'm just going to in the chat window, actually, Matthew, is there a place that I can paste information about people? Oh, Christabel, thanks for your question. What username and password to use in the last step? If you're referring, if you have a look at the slides, Christabel, the first step is to choose a username. You can choose anything you like. The second step is to choose a password. You can choose anything you like. Then you should enter 6453 as the course ID. And the very last step is where you just choose a 3-digit number between 100 and 500. Matthew, is there a good place that I can paste information about people? The chat window might be too small. Yeah, the chat window might be too small. I'm just going to paste in the usernames of people so we can see where everybody is from. Can I do it in the whiteboard somewhere?
Yeah, you could have a text comment in the whiteboard if you wanted to do that. There's a text editing box.
Yep, got it.
Do you see the tools?
Great. Yeah. Yep, got it. Yep, thanks. Okay. Let's see if this works. Okay, so you can. I'm not. Can you see the text window there?
Yeah, we can see it. Just a little bit covered over other things, but that doesn't matter.
Yep, sure. This is just to give you an idea of who's been able to log in, so you can see some of the different cities where people are from. Okay. What I'm going to do is just move on to this slide here. Now that you've answered the question that I had prepared earlier, I'm going to give you an opportunity to author your own questions, and I'll just the slide that you see in the Blackboard window in front of you just gives you an overview of that process. So to create your own question, click on one. Step one is to click on View, where it says Your Questions. Step two is to click the Create New Question button. Step three is to click, once you have then authored your question, once you've created your question, step three is to show me a preview of this question. And then step four is to either go back and make changes to that if you aren't happy with the preview. If you are happy with the preview, click on Save Question. That will then become available to all of the other people here. Now what I'm going to do is go into what's called application sharing, and that way you can see the window that I've got in front of me. If anyone is having a problem with this and you would like to just paste something in the chat window, I'm happy to try and help you out with that. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and look at the application sharing and just share my window with you. Okay, so what you see now, hopefully, in the Blackboard window is my web browser. Of course, this might look quite different to what you see. So for me, on the main menu, there are a couple of things of interest. The first thing that you can see highlighted in pink is that I've just earned some badges. So this is, if I'm a student that's kind of really motivated by that type of thing, then this might really interest me. And I can click on the link that says View My Badges to have a look at which ones I've earned. Now, I realize that the refresh rate is quite slow, so I won't scroll through this, but I'll just page down through it. And you can see that there are certain badges I've earned. So I've earned the Popular Question Author badge. This is for each question that is answered at least 10 times. It's, of course, because everybody answered that one question that I'd put up there. And thank you for those people who wrote comments about the question. That also helped me earn the Discussed Question Author badge for writing a question that receives 2 comments. And I've also earned the Leader badge because somebody chose to follow me as a question author. Let me just, you can also see the chart at the bottom of the screen there shows how many badges I've earned. So I've earned 4 badges, and other people have earned either 3 or 2 or 1 badge, and a couple of people haven't yet earned their first badge, but you will earn that as soon as you answer a question. So I'm just going to go back to the main menu. You can see that I've also got this notification that there are 14 comments about my question. Now, I think I saw someone write, I think it was Helen. Thank you for your comment, Helen. I like the way you can't identify who wrote the comments, and that's correct. So what you will see is that all of the content that's been contributed here is completely anonymous, so you can't see who the authors are of any of this content. I'm actually going to click on View here to have a look at the comments that were written about my question, and I'll just scroll down so that you can actually see these. So thank you for lots of interesting comments. You can see that some of the comments have these gold stars or red X's, and that is when someone either agrees or disagrees with the comment. So in this case, some of the comments, for example, the one at the bottom there, I heard this statistic the other day, otherwise I'd never have known or even guessed, that got 3 stars. And I'll just go back to the main menu, and you can see that there are 4 unanswered questions available. So 4 of you have managed to author a question, so that's really excellent. So what I might do now, what I would encourage other people to do, is if you are still working on the question that you're writing, please continue to do that. Otherwise, you might like to answer the questions that other people have authored. So I'm going to go ahead and answer some of these. I might actually just turn off screen sharing for the moment. That way, I'll switch back to this, so that way you can see these 4 steps. Step 1, 2, 3, and 4 for authoring a question if you haven't yet managed to do that. So I'll go ahead and answer a couple of these questions. In fact, what I might do, I'm not sure, of course, at what stage everyone is at, so I might just switch back into the application sharing, let you see my browser window again. And what I'm looking at here is the table of unanswered questions. And I'll just answer one question just to show you what that looks like. I know that most of you have managed to do this now. So this question is, who is the creator of Facebook? So there are several options available. So Tom Anderson, I think he was MySpace. And the other ones are fairly obviously not correct. So B looks to be the correct answer here. Now, notice that this question has already been answered by 7 people. And so when I answer it, in fact, by the time I answer it, another couple of people may have answered it. But what I will get to see is how other people have answered that question. So when I select my answer, I get the feedback that my answer is correct, and in fact there are now 10 people who have correctly answered this question. So it looks like this was a nice easy question. Here is the explanation, a nice straightforward explanation that was provided. No doubt Wikipedia might have helped in writing that. Well done to whoever authored that question. And now I have an opportunity to rate the question. So I found this very easy. But I thought it was a very excellent question, and I might thank the author for the question. I might also agree with the comment that it was too easy, and I will go ahead and submit that rating. So I'm just going to head back to the main menu now. Wow, it looks like we've already got 19 questions available. So there are 20 questions now. So it's really great to see some of these questions coming through. Please go ahead and answer some of the questions that have been written by other people so far. I think it would be really neat if you get some responses on your question. So please also write a comment back to the author of the question that you've just answered. So please go ahead and do that. For those of you that have either stopped that or would like to just watch in the window, I'll just very quickly show you the question creation process. So this is the question that I wrote. The one about YouTube. You can see that 36 people have answered the question so far. I'm just going to view the question. So here's the question to see what kind of responses we had. And in fact, a lot of people did overestimate the time. So most people actually selected 11 decades rather than 11 years. I'm going to go back and create a new question. So I'll just very quickly show you this process. So write new question, perhaps something very simple like what is the capital city of New Zealand? And then if we scroll down and look at the alternatives, we don't have to provide 5 alternatives, but I'm going to provide, let's say, just 3. So how about Auckland, Wellington, and Christchurch? And the correct answer, of course, is Wellington, so I just select answer for that. And in the explanation, I might want to provide some information about Wellington. What you see here are the topics that have already been created by other people when they wrote their questions. So in fact, geography does kind of apply to this question, so I'll just select that one. One thing that instructors can do is they can provide a set of topics that all students see. So if there's some particular way that you want your students to tag the questions, you can provide a list of topics. I'm just going to go ahead and have a preview of this question, make sure it looks correct, and then go ahead and save the question. And now you can see that I've got 2 questions created by me, and those questions are now available for everyone to answer. Okay, so what I might do is, because we've only got a relatively short period of time left, I'd like to very quickly talk about a case study, so what happened here at the University of Auckland when we used PeerWise in a course. So I will leave this available for after the workshop finishes, so for the rest of the night, if you want to have a play around, you're most welcome to do that. What I'd like to do, though, is just head back into the Blackboard session and talk a little bit about a recent case study. Again, could I maybe just get people to quickly type into the chat window whether they are ready to go, ready to move ahead? Wonderful. Okay, thanks. And if you really want to keep playing around, you're welcome to, but let's just, Elizabeth, I'll think, good to see you having fun. But I'm just going to quickly talk about a recent course here at the University of Auckland. So this course was called Population Health. One of the reasons that I've chosen it as the case study is it's a very large course. So there are over 1,000 students enrolled in this course every year. And it's taught in semester 1, which here at Auckland is from March to June. So this course has recently finished. It was just taught, the final exam was just a couple of months ago. You can see that I've listed 2 deadlines there. Now, a very common approach for instructors using PeerWise is to allocate a small fraction of the course's final grade to get students to just start using it. As you can imagine, if no students create questions, then of course the repository is going to be empty. So it's kind of important to encourage students to get underway. Now, in fact, what we have found is that for very large courses like this one, PeerWise actually works quite well even as a purely voluntary activity, because a small number of students are quite happy to author questions, even though it's only, what we found, typically only 5% of students will, between 5 and 10% will voluntarily author questions. Most students will voluntarily answer questions, but certainly for small classes, it's really important to provide some small carrot to get students underway. And it is interesting, as Amanda points out, that there were also 2 midterm tests that were held a couple of days before the deadlines. What I'd like to show you now is what happened in this course. So you can see that each student was required to author 2 questions and answer 40 questions over the course of the semester. At the bottom here, you can see that there were over 4,000 questions created by students in this course, and nearly sort of coming up towards 200,000 answers were submitted to those questions. And the chart on the right, so this chart here, shows the number of answers that were submitted each day over the semester. And you can see there are these 2 really large spikes that correspond to the days of the test. And this is very common to see students using the questions created by their classmates to help review for formal tests. You don't in this particular case, we didn't see any kind of peak a couple of days after the tests to correspond with the deadlines, and that's really because students had already used the system for revision and they had satisfied those requirements. The chart on the left here is the number of questions that were authored per day, and again, you don't see particularly large spikes corresponding to the deadlines. Most of the activity, for example, here happened before the deadline, and that was corresponding to the test. This chart I find very fascinating. It's really amazing to look at how different students participate with the activity. So what you see on the vertical axis here is the number of answers that were submitted by an individual student, and what you see on the horizontal axis are the 1,031 students in the course ordered by activity. So at the very left-hand edge here, this is the most active student in the course, and what you can see is that they answered approximately 4,000 questions. So they actually answered pretty much every question that was available. And I think if you try and estimate how long or how much effort was required to answer 4,000 questions, if you assume that a student spent 1 minute answering each question, so that will be the time to view the question, to select an answer, and to perhaps write a comment or provide some feedback or to rate the question. 1 minute per question there works out to about 65 hours. And so that's sort of a week and a half of what we would refer to as, full-time work. So it's really a huge commitment of time by that student. Now, of course, what you might think is that students on the far left-hand edge of this chart are just perhaps randomly clicking on answers and not really paying any attention and just being motivated by trying to get a large number of questions answered. But in fact, if we drill down and have a look at the top 3 most active students in this class, what you see is that the percentage of correct answers they submit is actually really high. So the top 2 most active students were answering 80% of the questions correctly. And on average, the number of alternative answers to a question is above 4. And so if they were just randomly selecting an answer, you would expect the percentage to be much lower. And so it does look like these students are actually using this seriously, and they are paying attention to the content. It's also quite interesting to look at how many days they were active. So an active day is a day where the student actually uses PeerWise, either authors a question or answers a question. So a really large amount of activity. This chart just shows the days of activity for all students in the course. So 10 days here is pretty much the median. So about half of the class were active for more than 10 days. And the absolute minimum level of activity would have been 2 days per student, because there were those 2 deadlines. And there were really only a very, very small number of students that were active for that absolute minimum period of time. We did survey the students to find out what they thought about authoring their own questions and also answering questions created by their classmates. And you can see that, at least in this particular class, students were very positive about both of these. And in fact, authoring questions, so creating my own questions, this bar here, was actually viewed as being somewhat more valuable to students than answering questions created by their classmates. So there is this evidence that students do find the authoring process very valuable, and just a relatively small number of students disagreeing. In terms of the open responses, I'll just look at these very quickly. So a lot of comments by students about the benefit of actually authoring questions, so things like being able to get into the mindset of the exam writer. You have to know the subject very well to ask a good question. So lots of comments about that type of thing. And the thing that students found was the biggest problem with PeerWise was that there were some low quality questions. So examples of comments, the quality of questions posted by my peers ranged from extremely poor to very good. And I think this comment down here is quite interesting because here the student was enrolled in another course, BioSci, which was also using PeerWise, but on a purely voluntary basis. So students in the BioSci course did not have to author questions. And what that meant was that there were a much smaller number of questions available in the repository for those students. However, those questions tended to be much better. So as the student said, they were much, much higher. And that was because not all students were being forced to author questions, it was really only the highly motivated students that were writing them, the questions tended to be really good. And so there is this interesting balance between kind of what's the ideal kind of level of required activity from students. I thought I'd pull out the absolute best question from the 4,000 or so questions that were developed. So this is the question that was the highest rated one. I'm not going to look at it in detail, but you can see that a lot of thought has gone into this. Here the student came up with a scenario and was asking students, or the question asked, what would be the best sort of study design for this particular scenario? And if you look at the explanation that the student wrote for that question, you can see that a lot of thought has gone into the explanation that was written, and this question was very highly rated by students in the course. And I think it's only fair, if we're looking at the very best question, to also look at the very worst question out of the 4,000 odd questions that were created. So this was the absolute lowest rated question. It was rated by 11 people. One thing to note is that the absolute best rated question was answered by 233 people, and yet the absolute worst rated question was only answered by 19. And I think this is an example of the filtering actually working. So once a question has a poor rating, many students don't tend to then see that content. It essentially gets filtered out through the use of the ratings. But the absolute worst question was this one. So the question was, what are some of the cons associated with overweightness? And you can see that the student who wrote the question has some very contradictory options. So life expectancy will decrease, life expectancy will not be decreased, and the correct answer, at least the correct answer that they indicated was correct, was all of the above are incorrect. And so there's clearly a lot of confusion going on there. And I have included the feedback so you can see what other students thought about this. And the most agreed with comment was just this, which is a little bit unfortunate. But other students are commenting about the fact that actually the life expectancy does decrease, and that is certainly a negative point about being overweight. And I'm pretty sure your options contradict each other. It can't be decreasing and not decreasing at the same time. And then trying to prompt the author to kind of explain themselves. Okay, and I see we're sort of just a bit about out of time now. So in the last sort of a couple of minutes, I'd just like to talk about how to get started. If you would like to use PeerWise with your own class, it's very, very simple to get started. If you go to the main PeerWise page, and you can get there just by Googling PeerWise, you can click on the Join Now link and just provide your name, the school or institution that you're affiliated with, and your email address, and then you will have an instructor account set up for you that you can use to create repositories for your students. Yep, Sally, thank you very much. Thanks for being here, Sally. Alison asked, is it free? Yes, absolutely. So it's completely free to sign up. Anybody can sign up, please. If you think, even if you're not teaching a course that you think might benefit from this type of a tool, but perhaps you know colleagues who you think might be teaching courses where it could work, you might like to encourage them to give it a go. Now, the actual process for Alison, yes. So this was a sort of personal project of mine that I started several years ago now, and I was really interested in just getting students in my own class to use it. Yep, Catherine, thanks very much. I'll just, because I realize some people are leaving, let me just quickly cover this last section. So if you do want to set up a course for your students, once you have your instructor account, and let's say you've got 5 students, and these are their identifiers, they might be student IDs, the process is just 2 steps. So step 1 is clicking the Create New Course button, and then typing a name for your course, and step 2 is providing those identifiers, and so you can just paste them into a box, and that's it. And once you've done those 2 steps, the students in your class will go through exactly the same process that you just went through today in terms of registering and then beginning to interact with that course. There are a few things to consider. I've talked a little bit about some of these, so I think it's a good idea to require students to participate, particularly in small classes. It's really important to kind of encourage students to get underway. I know many instructors use the very best questions created by their students on formal examinations. That can be a really good way of sort of motivating students to not only create good questions, but also to use the resource as a practice repository. I think it's also a good idea, if possible, to review the questions that students are creating, and the way that I've been doing this recently is to let the students rate the questions as they do normally, and then use those ratings to provide a filter for me so that I don't have to look at all of the questions, but I sort of focus on the lower quality questions, and then, for example, tend not to reward students who've contributed questions that are particularly low quality. And again, I think we also mentioned that it's I think, useful to provide some exemplars for students to help them develop good questions. And so that's it. So I realize a lot of people have to go, and I'd be I'm very happy to stick around. I would like to thank everybody who's taken some time out of their day to come along. I know Matthew's just pasted into the chat room there a survey, so please fill in the survey for Matthew if you can now. And I'll just hang about here, and if you have any questions, I'm not sure if you want to do that through the microphone or just through the chat room, but I'll certainly do my best to answer any questions that you have. So thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, Paul, I just want to say thank you very much on behalf of everyone, and you're right, some people are leaving, but we'll stay on a bit so that people can ask some more questions if they wish. Now, again, you can ask the questions two different ways. You can either type them into the text box, or you could put your hand up if you want, if you'd like to do an audio question. Right? So just put your hand up like that, and we'll see a number come up beside your name. So Chad will get to you in a sec. Paul, I just want to say that was an absolutely great presentation. You used the technology really well, so obviously we like to showcase some of the technology as well, but also you made it very interactive, very practical, but you also, I think, have given us something really interesting to think about in terms of the interface between learning and assessment, because one of the things that's come up in terms of this webinar series that we've been running is just how learning and assessment are so intimately integrated with each other. And I think you've shown a really nice example of how we can do that. So I'm going to stop talking now, and Chad, I'm going to hand over the microphone to you.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Paul, for a really fantastic presentation, really inspiring and motivating. I was wondering if you're aware of anyone who's used PeerWise in a more kind of a more formal assessment in a way. I've got a very small group of students, say 20 to 25, and I'd actually like to get them to, I think this process is valuable enough to, allocate, say, 20% of the courses of the semester's, grade to. I'm guessing that I would have to look closely at their, their comments and the quality of their questions and answers, and really do a kind of more traditional assessment, maybe with a rubric or something like that of that. Are you aware of anyone who's used it in that kind of fashion or anything?
Yeah, great. Thanks very much for your question, Chad. So first thing, yes, I think with small classes, if you want to kind of allocate such a large proportion of the final grade to the activity, I think it really is important for you to, as the expert, as the instructor, to validate the quality of the student's content. So in some courses, so let me start by talking about where it hasn't worked very well. I know that in some courses, instructors have allocated a large percentage of the final grade and then used the ratings that have been assigned by students to the questions to actually allocate that grade. And that hasn't worked very well because it tends to create a much more competitive environment between the students. So students sort of know that, perhaps if they give their classmate a low rating for their question, that's in some way going to kind of help them relative to their peer. And so that doesn't work very well. I do know of some examples in small classes where instructors have done exactly the thing that you're describing, and that is they've, at the end of the course, they've taken an offline dump of all of the questions and then gone through those questions and evaluated them according to some rubric. What I don't have, but perhaps other people in the chat room who are still around have, are examples of those rubrics, and they may depend on your actual discipline. And then, of course, so have a look at Amanda's comment in the chat room. And of course, in very, very large classes, it's not practical to go and evaluate everybody's content. But certainly, I think in small classes, that's a really, really great way of doing it. I'd encourage the students to put a lot of effort into the question authoring process. And certainly, if you do that, I'd love to hear how you get on. So please keep in touch.
Okay, Melina, would you like to ask your question? Would you like to take the mic? Just press the talk button if you want to talk.
Hi, Melina, it's Paul here. I can't hear your question, so maybe you might want to type it into the chat window or turn your microphone on.
It's fine. While Melina's doing that, I noticed there was a question from Tracy Winnie in the text box earlier, and it was really around, I think I'm interpreting, I'm just scrolling back to find it. I'm assuming that question, Tracy, was around kind of group activities related around, say, writing the questions as a group in class so that there's actually a discussion while they're doing that. So I wonder, Paul, whether you've had any experience of that.
Yeah, no, but so I haven't personally, but this is, and Amanda might also be able to comment on this. I know Amanda's done these sorts of things, but certainly the work that's been done by the group at the University of British Columbia at UBC, they have this activity where prior to the PeerWise, the sort of solitary PeerWise activity that students undertake, they have these pre-PeerWise workshops where students do work in groups to develop good questions, and the whole purpose of those workshops is to give students ideas about how to develop good questions for that particular discipline. And so I know that they do that pre-PeerWise workshop activity to kind of upskill the students and give them ideas about how to write good questions prior to actually getting the students to use the tool. And I think that has worked extremely well. Sorry, was it Tracy who wrote the question? I don't have it handy with me right now, but if you wanted to email me, then I could certainly send you a link to their work.
I'd like to just ask, how much experience did you have, Paul, with the Blackboard Collaborate technology before you did this session?
Oh, thanks for the question, Melina. I hadn't used it before, so this was the first time that I'd had a chance to play around with it. But it seemed to work very well, I thought.
Sorry, Matthew, could I ask another question? I know you were using Wimber last year, so what was the reason you changed?
That's fine. I'll answer that one. This is Jeff here, Melina. Yeah, I moved universities, and Matthew moved, and we just went on to a different system because that's what this is actually running out of RMIT University, and they were using Blackboard Collaborate, so that's the main reason we're using it.
Thanks.
I'd love to take some more questions now, but I'll just highlight for those people that have to leave. My email address is here on the last slide, so if you want to send me an email offline, I'd be delighted to get back in touch with you. But if anyone has any other questions, please do ask them now. Yep, Simon, thanks very much for that, and have a nice day at work. And yes, please complete the feedback survey. Matthew has just posted that again into the chat box.
Okay, any more questions from people, either to type in or to take the mic? Do you want to ask another question?
Yes, please. I was just going to ask, if this is free, how do you actually make anything from it? What's the incentive?
That's a very good question. So basically, as I mentioned in passing before, this kind of began as a personal project. I wanted students in a small summer school class that I was teaching to be able to create and share questions with one another. But I tried to develop the tool in a way that it would be simple for other people if they wanted to make use of it in their own classes. And so really it's just grown kind of organically through that process and through word of mouth and through excellent avenues for dissemination like this Transforming Assessment series that Jeff and Matthew run. And it's so in terms of the cost, I think the reason that it's free is that there really isn't a major cost associated with it. The University of Auckland has been excellent in terms of providing the hosting of the application, and my role is really just maintaining it. And so for that reason, there really hasn't been a need to try and pass on those costs. And so it's sort of a goodwill, I think, on the part of the University of Auckland to provide this tool for other people to use. I should point out that there is each institution page does have a support link where if you want to, you're welcome to donate, but that's absolutely voluntary and not required at all. And so I think if you think it's something that you're going to find useful, then please make use of it. I think there are something like 450 institutions at the moment who are making use of it. And I think that's just really good to see. And I think it is important, though, for me to acknowledge, the support of the University of Auckland in terms of, making it possible to host this for free for other people to use.
Thank you.
Paul, I think a couple of times someone's asked about, is there any limit to the number of users that you can have on the system if people create an account, or is there any limit to the number of questions that they can have deposited in your system?
Right. Yeah, that was Michael. Thank you, Michael, for that question. At the moment, there is no built-in limit. So when you create your course, you provide a list of identifiers for students, which are the students who are going to have access to that repository. And the largest course that I know, so everything is kind of organized around courses, because one thing I should point out is, this tool is not designed, to be the be-all and end-all, right? It really is designed for this one activity where you have a cohort of students who have been learning some content together, and you want them to be able to reflect on that content and create and share this repository of questions. And so it's really based around kind of the classroom. And the largest classroom that I know of that's used it was here in New Zealand at the University of Otago, where they had somewhere just over 2,000 students, I think, enrolled. And so all of those 2,000 students were collaborating on the same repository, and that seemed to work well. And again, there's no limit on the number of questions that students can create. What we typically find in our experience is that students will answer many more questions than you require of them. So, for example, as we saw in the population health case study that I presented here, I think the average number of questions answered by students was something like 170, and yet the requirement was something like 40. And so that's very common, but what you don't see a lot of is students authoring more questions than they require. And so we don't tend to see, this explosion of questions being created. If you ask each student in your class to author 2 questions, for example, that will give you a pretty good idea of how many questions you're going to end up with when the activity finishes. So Michael's asked another question. Have you studied the relations or associations between the number of or quality of the questions developed by students with their summative performance? Yes, Michael, we have looked at that. For that particular question, we haven't been able to run any randomized controlled studies because we haven't been able to randomly allocate students to groups where one group has access to the tool and the other group doesn't. But what we have run are essentially pseudo-controlled studies or correlation studies where we have the students sit some type of pre-test to get an idea of their kind of incoming level of knowledge or their incoming ability. Then we have them all make use of PeerWise, and then at the end of the PeerWise activity, we have them all sit some post-test to get an idea of kind of their ability at that point. And we've looked at all sorts of things such as, you know, the improvement between the pre and the post-test based on their activity. We've looked at the change in rank. So we've used the pre-test to rank the students, then we've looked to see how that rank has changed based on their usage. And so there are some publications around that. I think there are lots of unanswered interesting questions still remaining, so I think there is lots of work that can be done, and I would definitely encourage people who are interested in collecting that type of data and doing work in that direction, either to kind of explore that on your own, and in many cases I know of people who are doing this, and I'm more than happy to provide any data that you think you might need for your experiment that is not already available to you in the interface. I didn't get a chance to show you kind of what the administrator sees, but as you can imagine, the administrator or the instructor for a course has the ability to view a complete summary of their student participation. But in many cases, for research studies, you want more data than just that, and I'm very happy to provide that to anybody who wants to run these types of studies. Thanks, Viola. Thanks, Elizabeth. Milena, is that another question?
Yes. Yeah, I'm just a bit put off by that noise that starts when I hit the talk button. I didn't know whether that was me or not.
No, I can hear you loud and clear.
That's okay. I was just going to thank you very much and to say, do you come to Australia at any time?
Yes, I make frequent trips, and I've been very, very lucky to be able to present this type of work and even run hands-on workshop sessions at a number of conferences, and certainly if there's any interest in that type of thing, I'd be absolutely delighted to do that. So if you do know of any opportunities, please feel free to get in touch.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Milena. Well, let me just say, it looks like, yep, Ian from Melbourne. Well, Ian, I think you need to press the talk button if you want me to hear you. Oh, Rhett, that's great, with 600 students. I'm pleased to hear it's going well so far. While Ian's working out how to ask the question, Ian, if you want to type it in the chat box, that's fine. Let me just say to the 18 people remaining, thank you very much for your participation. It was really, really fun for me to see this being used by people in these different geographic locations. As I mentioned to Milena, I have run some workshops where I've been in the room physically and actually seeing everybody, but it's really been a lot of fun to see people use this in this particular way, and so I really appreciate your participation. Yeah, that's good to hear, Rhett. I'm pleased that it's gone well. Ian, yep. I just want to say, no problem at all. Yep, you're most welcome. Thanks, Pauline. Bye. Has anybody not filled out the survey? I think Matthew posted a link to that. Thanks, Tim. Tim, and thank you very much for your communication that we've had previously. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the offer of help. Yeah, as Matthew says, you've got a last-minute chance if you want to fill in the survey. Yes, Ian. I have an open course but also have my enrolled students. Could I include a guest ID, which will force students? Sorry. Could I include a guest ID as well as my student numbers? Yeah, absolutely. So sorry, who was it asked the question? Ian. Yeah, Ian. When you create your course, it's completely up to you as the instructor what you choose to use as those student identifiers. So, you could use a mixture of email addresses or student ID numbers or even random codes that you've come up with, as long as the students know what to enter when they register for your course. And so if you've got some students on campus, for example, who have student ID cards, they can use student ID numbers, and you might have another group of students off campus, I think, if that's what you're asking, then yeah, you can absolutely do that. There's no problem at all. So the identifiers that you use are just strings, text strings. They can be anything that you like. Hannah, well, I think this has been recorded, and so if you go back to the Transforming Assessment website, you'll be able to see a recording of it if that helps. And yes, sorry also to have missed you as well. It would have been nice to have you there. Thanks, Kevin. As Matthew said, so the recording should be available in a few days, so please feel free to come back and watch the recording. Hannah, where are you?
Charles Sturt.
Charles Sturt. Ah, good. I know there are a few people at Charles Sturt who've... do you have any experience using PeerWise, or do you know people there who do? I wonder how it's gone.
Rett's at Charles Sturt.
Ah, Rett's at Charles Sturt, yep. Okay, great. Well, that's really good to hear.
Okay, well, I think we've probably given you a good run for your money, Paul, tonight. Great. So if it's okay with everyone, we might draw it to a close. And Paul, just to say thank you very much again for your time. We really appreciate that. And as Matthew's indicated, this will be recorded, so we'll certainly make it available on the Transforming Assessment website. And Paul, I've been, obviously I've followed PeerWise for a while now. But it's been really great to be able to do this presentation with the quite a big audience we had tonight. So that was great. And just to reiterate, I think one of the really nice things I like about PeerWise is it brings this idea of learning and assessment much closer together. Because I think one of the things we've tried to talk quite a lot about during this Transforming Assessment series is that learning and assessment are not two separated activities. They actually are a very closely related activity, and the more we can get students to see that assessment can actually be used for learning as well as the sort of judgmental stuff we want to do with it, I think the better for all of us, and we'll actually have much more sophisticated curricula designed to be around using some of these sorts of tools. So Paul, thanks very much again. Thanks very much for everyone who's still here, and say goodnight to everyone.
Yep, thank you very much, Jeff and Matthew, for the opportunity.